me to your class. So I am a ceramic artist. I live in Maine, as your teacher said, and I make my living making and selling pots. I first learned how to throw when I was in high school. So just like you guys, I was taking some sort of an art class, and I was really lucky. And my art teacher, he taught everything. We only had one art teacher for the whole middle school and high school, but he worked in a pottery in the summer, and he had collected, I think, 3 wheels. And so for one section of one class, you could get to try out the wheel. I absolutely loved it. And I would spend study halls in the art room whenever I could, and just really, really loved that process of throwing and hand building, and fell in love with it at that point. But nobody told me at that point that you could actually go to college to study ceramics. So I was interested in art, and I come from kind of a math science family. My parents and my sister all studied engineering in college. And yeah, so talking with my guidance counselor, architecture sort of seemed like a really great fit for me. It was a combination of art and math, and on paper made a whole lot of sense. So I ended up in an architecture program at a place called Bennington College, which is a small liberal arts school in Vermont, never having drawn a building in my life. And my first couple years, it wasn't too bad. I enjoyed drafting, I enjoyed building models, but then kind of mid sophomore year, we started doing a lot of computer aided drafting, so CAD programs, and spending all day staring at the computer, which I'm sure you guys are getting a lot of these days doing your remote learning from home. And it just didn't make my heart sing. I'm somebody who loves to work with their hands. And as soon as that was taken out of the architecture program, I found myself not loving it as much anymore. But luckily, Bennington also has a ceramics program. So my sophomore year, I also found my way back to the clay studio and fell in love with the wheel all over again. And so by the time I got done with college, I finished my degree in architecture. I did my thesis in architecture, but I did my senior show in clay. And I kind of knew from that point forward that that was really what I wanted to pursue. So I ended up doing what they call a 5th year. A lot of colleges now call it a post-bac program at Syracuse University, where I went there just for the year and was just in the clay studio, and kind of deciding if making pots all day, every day was really what would be the best fit for me, and it was wonderful. So from there, I decided to go to graduate school, and I went to UMass Dartmouth for grad school, and then since then have been making my living as a potter. So at some point after we ask some questions and talk over some stuff, I'll give you guys a little tour of my studio so you can see everything here, because I'm in my studio today, as you can see from all the pots and tools behind my head. So as I said, I make my living as a potter. So every day I come to the studio and make pots. It's very self-driven. Being an independent artist, you don't have a boss saying, hey, you got to get these pots done every day. So I'm pretty good at saying, okay, I'm going to go in and get the work done. And I love making every day. So it's very rewarding for me, but it's definitely a very self-driven profession. My husband is a potter as well. So we kind of joke that our home life comes with us to the studio every day. We actually, our dog, where'd she go? She was sitting right behind me a minute ago. She comes to the studio every day, and my husband comes to the studio every day, and we all, hang out here and make lots of work. And we also, you'll see we have a teaching space. So we teach 3 classes a week to adults. And our area, we're small town Maine, has never really had a teaching ceramic studio before. So it's kind of the beginning for a lot of people. We also have lots of students who say, oh, I took ceramics when I was in high school and I loved it, and I've always wanted to do it again. So it's been really rewarding to have them have a place for their creativity as well. But like so many people, we are not teaching classes right now. So it's been very quiet, but really good for getting lots and lots of work done. Yeah.
Great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got Martha Grover's website pulled up. So I'm going to have her talk a little bit about her work and give some specifics. Can you guys see her website? Can you give me a thumbs up? Okay. Alrighty. So this is Martha Grover's website. It's just marthagrover.com if you want to follow along on your own device. But I'm going to hand it back over to Martha, and I can click through if you want to direct me a little bit.
So as you can see, this is the kind of opening page of my website, and each one of those blocks leads you to a different section of the gallery, and it's kind of divided up by what the types of objects are. So things with lids, things that store flowers, serving vessels. I also make these kind of crazy wall pieces, perfume bottles and mirrors and things like that that are a little bit more sculptural but still have a function, and then some tableware. The very last icon, there are lots of pictures of making things in the studio, and then I actually have a full-length DVD with Ceramics Monthly, and they have generously put some of the clips of that on YouTube that anybody can watch for free. So the clips from that DVD are on my website as well. So if you want to watch me in action making stuff, that's a great place to go. Also on my website, there are some sections about upcoming events. I think if you scroll up just a little bit, so there's an about section with my artist statement and my resume, and then things that were coming up. I actually need to update my website because nearly all of this has been canceled, or postponed or moved. And I actually hadn't thought about it until this moment. So our Maine pottery tour is hopefully going to be in June, but we shall see. Finger Lakes pottery tour is canceled. And then there's a section about our classes, and we give private lessons in our studio. I do a summer workshop in my studio where people come from, I guess, around the world. I had somebody come from Brazil last year. And people can come and learn from me for a week, which is really great. And then contact information and a link to my web store. So there's a lot of information on my website. Hopefully most anything that anybody would be looking for. And yeah, in the gallery, as I said, there are tons and tons of pictures. So each one of those blocks you can click on, and there's a whole bunch more images. You can pick anything you want and click
Okay.
on it.
Let's talk about in-process work. So maybe talk a little bit about what kind of clay you work with, what inspires you.
So I work with a high fire porcelain. My pieces are fired up to about 2310 Fahrenheit, so cone 10, cone 11. You can see the cones right there in the kiln. And the porcelain that I'm using is actually from Montana. Before we moved back to Maine, back to my hometown, we were in a place called the Archie Bray Foundation, which is a ceramic residency program. And I did a couple of different residencies there, and then I worked in the gallery, and then I was their education coordinator for a few years. And I fell in love with this clay body. It's really easy to throw, hand builds well, because I kind of do a combination of hand building and wheel throwing. And it is translucent. So when it gets fired up to that hot temperature, the clay actually transmits a little bit of light, so that if you hold it up in the sunshine and move your hands behind it, you can actually see light coming through. So on my thin edges, there's kind of this, it almost feels like the clay is glowing, which I really love. So everything starts out round, and then I change the shape in lots and lots of different ways by taking my fingers and pushing in and pushing out, adding on lots of different slabs. Most of the time I throw without a bottom. So, when you're first learning, it's really important that you actually leave clay at the bottom of the piece. And I break that rule every time, and I open all the way down so that I can have the pieces not end up round when I get done, by adding on a slab on the bottom, which is what I was doing in that picture. I really love color, lots and lots of different bright colors. I airbrush my glazes so that I can get these interesting fades from white into bright color at the rim of a piece. And I look at lots and lots of different flowers, especially orchids. I'm interested in long flowing dresses and making my pieces feel as elegant as possible. I love things that look sort of like they could be the body, they could be a flower growing, they kind of morph between all of those different things. Lots and lots of flowing, curving lines in my work.
So
Yeah.
where do you often like find inspiration for your pieces?
So I have a big flower garden. So in the summertime, I spend an awful lot of time out weeding the garden and just looking at all of the different um, forms and curves of the pieces. I love classic old movies, and so movies with Audrey Hepburn and Grace Kelly, and they'll come on to the screen in these beautiful long flowing dresses, and I try to get that sense of elegance into the work. Um, let's see, I have some orchids growing in my studio, so in the winter time, those are always a good source of inspiration. I also have lots and lots of books of flowers, so I tend to look at those a lot. Good question. Yeah. This is interesting to watch through all this stuff. I haven't, you put stuff on your website and then you kind of forget about it for a while, so.
Yeah. So I got to listen to Martha talk at a pottery conference back in October. And one of the things that really stood out for me is kind of the efficiency that Martha has kind of developed in the studio. So could you talk a little bit about how you stay efficient and on task? I know you talked about kind of that self-determination. You've got to get up and get into the studio yourself, but how do you stay efficient?
So when I started out making my work, I would make one mug and one bowl and then one butter dish and kind of jump around a lot, kind of keeping myself mentally engaged by changing tasks. But I definitely over time have realized that if I spend all day just making mugs, then I'm much, much more efficient. So I can start out in the morning and throw 20 to 30 mug bodies and then spend the afternoon and evening finishing them, finishing the rims, putting handles on, putting bottoms on. And I also have found kind of what's my comfortable rhythm in the studio. When we go walking around, you guys will see my kiln. I fire at a big oval electric kiln. This kiln that you're seeing right now is actually one that I was using at the Archie Bray. So a few years ago when I was in Montana, I was firing in a gas kiln, but now I'm using an electric one. And I have found that in a month, so I spend usually 2.5 weeks making my work and then letting it dry and then bisque firing and then glazing and then finishing the pots and getting things photographed and sent out. And that usually is about a month-long cycle. And in that 2.5 weeks of making at the beginning of the month, it usually just about fills up my kiln, maybe with a little bit of overflow. So I've found that balance between what keeps me engaged, what works well with my equipment and with my space that I'm working within. Your shelves will only hold so many pots. So I kind of right now, the size of my studio fits the size of my kiln. And also it's just long enough that by the end of the making period, I'm ready to kind of switch it up and be glazing. And then by the end of glazing and firing, I'm just itching to get my hands back into wet clay. So it's as a studio artist is kind of, I have found it really important to find those rhythms of what works well for my body. Being a ceramic artist can be really hard on your body, sitting at a wheel all day, working with heavy clay, wedging, it's physically taxing. So, and then glazing uses different muscles and a different part of the brain. So having that balance going back and forth works really, really well for me, I think.
So how much pottery do you usually make per day?
It depends on the day. It depends on what I'm making. So if I was making a big stacking tulipier form, I might get 2 done in a week. If I'm making mugs, maybe I can make 20 to 30 in a day. Bowls, I might be able to get 40 done in a day, but that's pushing it. Butter dishes, maybe 4 or 5. So kind of depending on the complexity, it definitely varies. But I usually, again, in that month-long firing cycle, I usually make 100 to 150 pots, depending. And, we're all sort of slaves to the market in some way. So I sell more mugs than anything else. So if I make 100 pieces in a month, probably 40 to 50 of them are mugs. And then the other 50 are everything else that I make. So whether it's boxes or butter dishes or vases, that gets divided up. So I make a lot less of those things than I do mugs because that's what buys my groceries, if you will.
Good question, Maddie.
How do
Yeah.
you
Say that one more time.
How do you price your work?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that there are lots of different ways to price your work that I've heard other artists talk about. For me, I look at the market and say, okay, what are other artists who are kind of at the same place in their careers? So many years I finished grad school in '07, so I'm 13 years out of grad school. I know what residencies I've done, what galleries I'm showing at. And so I kind of look at other artists and what they're selling their work for. Other methods that I've heard people talk about, you could sit there with a stopwatch in your studio and time how long it takes you to make each piece. You could say, okay, I can make 100 pieces in a month, and I know that the average price of those pieces needs to be X and such in order to pay all of my bills. Or you could say I'm using so much clay, so the piece should be valued at this much. But I find that all of those equations, often I would either the price would be way too high or just not in line with what the market is selling things of this nature for. So I tend to just look at what, if I look at a gallery, kind of the going price for, let's say, a mug, that's kind of a good place to start, is sort of 45 to 95 right now. And mine are 65. So they're kind of mid-range in that. A lot of folks, unfortunately, I didn't get to go to the clay conference this year because it was also canceled. But that's always a really great place to look at what my peers are selling their work for. And last year when I went to NCECA, it was kind of $75 was a normal price for a mug. So I'm still on the low end of that. But I also don't want to make the work so expensive that it's not accessible to people. So, so 65 kind of feels like a good spot for me right now.
Great question. Okay, who else has a question?
What is your favorite piece of object to make?
Oh gosh. Well, I always used to say until recently that it was pictures. They're kind of an interesting functional conundrum. You have a handle that you're holding on to. The pitcher is pouring. There's volume involved. There's some interesting ergonomics. So you've got the body, the spout, the handle, and it's kind of fun to play with all of those. But I think recently I've actually been more excited about making vases of different sorts. I make these kind of strappy flower brick forms that almost look like a rib cage, and then some of those big stacking tulipier forms, and they have lots and lots of different parts. So it's really fun to play with all of those, and then also think about how the form looks when it's actually filled with flowers. So that's kind of been my love recently. Although I have to say I was just invited to a margarita glass show, and I had never made tall, long-stemmed goblet forms in any way before. And that was kind of a really fun project for me to do in my studio. So sometimes for me, the new thing that I've never made before is the exciting thing. So good question. Well, would you guys like to go on a little tour of my studio?
Yes, we would.
All right, so let me get my camera flipped around. There we go. Okay, so right now I am in my little making space. So my studio is actually really, really large. We have about 6,000 square feet, but my individual spot where I make my pots is only about 12 by 12. It's quite small. Through school and through residency programs, this was kind of the size that a lot of my studios were, and it feels very, very comfortable for me. You can see I just got through a glazing cycle, so I've got lots of glazed pots in the studio. These are some of those tall stemmed drinking vessels I was talking about that are recent. I'm working on some big, I guess everything's covered up right now. I'm working on some big juicing pitchers right now. So great big pitchers that have kind of a juicing reamer on the top, which are pretty fun. So that's my tiny space. But beyond that, we have a little showroom area. So there's where people would come into the studio if people were out and about. and some pots on display. That's all my work. And then, as I said, my husband is a potter as well, so his work is on this side. So we have sort of his and her pots. There's some more of his stuff on the way in. And then I keep a lot of pots on hand. So this is all my back storage of pots, things that are for sale online, things waiting to go to shows. We were just talking earlier before you guys all came online. I've had a lot of stuff canceled this spring, so I've got a lot of pots in the studio right now. And as you all know, so much of the world takes place online. There's my husband, Josh. So I spend a lot of time on the computer, and to get work out in the world, it involves photography. So there's our photo setup, and then we'll go back down. I'll try not to make you guys seasick walking around. So back down this hallway, we're about to go past my studio again, things drying. This is Josh's studio. He's been doing a lot of projects with this sort of weird pause that we're on right now of building tables and doing projects around the studio. So he hasn't been making quite as much work. But we have a glaze lab, so I mix all of my glazes myself. We have these beautiful pull-out bins for all our dry materials. It's a little extravagant for two potters, but it's a really nice space to work in for glazing. Reclaiming clay, and as I said, I airbrush my work, so I built myself a spray booth. So this is my spray booth, which used to be a shower stall, and a cleanup sink for glazing. And then out here is our community classroom. So we have this really large space, big sink with drainage because clay and the septic system don't go so well together. Pug mill, glazing for our students. Josh is in the middle of building a table right now. Storage for our students when they're here, hand building area, slab roller. Winter in Maine involves heat and wood, so there's our big furnace and wood for that. And we have 10 wheels for our students, so that all happens right here. And again, more shelving for them. Our kiln area, this big guy at the end is my workhorse. It's my big oval kiln. I can fit, I guess, for bisque, I can fit anywhere from 100 to 120 pots in there. Glaze, it's more like 80 to 90, because of course you can't stack things in a glaze kiln. And then we have 3 other kilns that we use as well. It's sort of a kiln zoo, lots and lots of different sizes. And that's about half of our building. And the other half, we have, it's a little messy in the other half, and dark because I haven't turned on the lights, but we have a wood shop. So we've got a planer and a joiner and a table saw and a chop saw and bandsaw. We've got some welding equipment. And then this disaster, excuse the mess, I have a packing and shipping area. So lots of boxes and peanuts and foam and all of that. We also have a forklift, which is, it came with the building, but can be very, very handy. So that's kind of the 5-cent tour, as it were. So you guys have any questions about that, about the space and whatnot? I'll head back into my studio where it's a little more quiet. There we go.
Okay, who else has a question?
I have a question. Like when you have your stuff online for people to buy, how fast do you go through everything on your website? Like how often do people buy stuff?
So I am someone that I make a lot of pots, and so I tend to keep my web store fairly well stocked all the time. So I usually have between 70 and 100 pots available, and people buy them like 1 or 2 things a day. There might be a day where somebody doesn't buy anything, rather than, I think a lot of the ceramics community has sort of tapped into the supply and demand mentality of a lot of people, and they'll only post pots every month or 3 months or 6 months, and then it's this huge frenzy for everybody to go and buy all of them. And I don't enjoy that way of shopping myself. I don't know, somebody will post stuff, it's like, oh, I gotta get online right at this moment and buy whatever's left, and so I don't want to give my customers that experience, and I'm able to make enough pots to meet the demand. So I always have work available. Yeah, so I post, I tend to, I think it would probably be smart if I posted 1 or 2 pots every few days, but I tend to do it in big lumps where, I'll put 30 new things on, and then, it might take another month or 2 for those to sell, and then I'll add some more. But there's always a pretty good stock of things. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is there a certain temperature you have to keep your clay at in your?
So it's really important that your clay doesn't freeze, because ice is bigger than water. So when your clay freezes, the ice crystals kind of break up all of the clay particles, and then when it thaws, you end up with sort of sheets with water in between them. And it can be brought back to usable, where you have to wedge it and 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 wedge it some more. And then finally that moisture will work its way back in. But other than that, as long as it doesn't freeze, I try to keep a box or 2 in my studio where it's a little bit warmer, and then the rest of it stays out in the back of the warehouse where it doesn't freeze, but maybe it's staying at like 45 degrees in the winter. But that's really cold on your hands when you put it on the wheel. So I try to keep a little bit of it in where it's staying, 60 or 70 degrees. So it's more comfortable for these guys when I'm making pots. Good question. Anything else, guys?
I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you know when your pieces are finished? Like, what makes them complete in your mind?
Well, I think for a lot of the things that I make, and probably a lot of potters will tell you this, there's a lot of repetition. So right now, I have my 4 or 5 mug forms that I make, and I have my butter dish form, and that slowly morphs and changes over time. Maybe the handle gets a little bit bigger, or the body gets a little smaller, or the rim gets a little more frilly, but it's kind of a slow increment. So I have my things that I'm making, and in some way, my brain sort of goes into neutral a little bit when I make them. I tend to listen to a lot of audiobooks in the studio, and so I'll be making and making and making and listening to this amazing story, and at the end of the day, it's like, wow, look at all these pots that happened. It's a little bit harder when it's something that I've never made before. So I think when I'm being very creative and coming up with a totally new form, that question of when is it done, when is it not done, does start to play in. And I'm looking at things like proportions between maybe the size of a handle and the size of the body, or how many frills there are around the edges, or how many handles the piece has. Josh, my husband, constantly picks on me about how many handles I like to put on pots. If one's good, 10 is probably better in my mind. Whether it is or not, I don't know. But so there is quite a bit of that, as I said, repetition, where I'm repeating and repeating and repeating, and it's kind of a slow burn of things changing over time, where things change just a little tiny bit, and I might not even notice it. My eye is just telling me, oh, let's make this bigger, let's make that smaller. And then 6 months goes by, and I'll look at the pots and I'll be like, wow, okay, so there's been a shift, there's been a change. Yeah, so when you're repeating, it's maybe a little bit easier to say when something's done.
Good question, Jordan. Okay, who else has a question? We've got time for maybe 2 or 3 more.
I have a question. So like your pieces, they have like a really like distinct like style to them. How did you go about like finding your style?
So for me, I think graduate school was really important for that. When I went into grad school, I had just started altering pots. I'd started working with porcelain, and unfortunately, I'm on my phone instead of my computer, so I can't pull up any of those images to show you guys of old pots. But when you look at them, you can see that they were made by me. There was still some of the similar forms that I'm working on now. And I think for me, my education sort of, I had something that my hands were doing and then my eye was drawn to, but I didn't really have an idea of where those forms were coming from. It was just something that, you know, I kept noticing myself, you know, it's like we love green or we love blue, and you're like, well, why am I drawn to that one particular thing? So through grad school, it was constant critique and writing new artist statements and re-exploring and explaining. And so I think that sort of cemented for me why I'm interested in these objects, what flowers they relate to, what movies they relate to, what forms they relate to that I love, and kind of how all of that fits together. But it definitely, you know, I found myself being drawn to something, and then I exploited that and said, okay, well, if I'm drawn to this, then how can I push that even more and make the forms even more curvaceous and more flowery? And yeah, good question.
Okay.
Anything else, guys?
All righty. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today about your work and kind of your work ethic. And I really appreciated hearing about the efficiency in the studio. And I think that's important for kids to see because they don't necessarily see the parts where I'm loading up the kiln or
Yeah.
taking kind of care of the behind the scenes. They're all producing and working, but they don't necessarily see, you know, like what does it take to fire all of these pieces and glaze all of them and then load them up. So I really appreciated you talking about that and showing us around the studio, because most of these kids, they just know a studio as an art classroom. They don't actually know that people have areas set up for art creation. So it was really great for them to see. So thank you so much. I really appreciate taking the time to come and talk to us and for figuring out Zoom.
Well, thanks, guys. It was great to be here with you today. Good luck with all of your pinch pots. And it'll be really exciting for you when you're actually back in your art classroom next year and getting to use all that equipment again. So keep making, keep being creative, and stay healthy.
Thank you so much, Martha.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
There's a ton of water moving upstairs.
Okay.
If you want to say hi, Mr. Campbell, you can go ahead.
Mr. Campbell.
Mr. Campbell.
Mr.
Mason,
Campbell.
what are you doing? You're supposed to be at home, quarantining.
Huh?
What are you doing?
I am at home. She's at my home.
Yeah.
I'll go say hi.
Why are you there?
We lost power at our house,
What?
so we had to go somewhere else. And they offered.
Okay.
No.
So we've got about 4 minutes left of class here. I really appreciated you guys, your guys' questions. I think that this was really good for you guys to see, and you guys were attentive and you asked really great questions. So I'm really impressed. What I want you to do is sometime before next class period, so you have until next week, just write 3 sentences and email them to me about what you took away from this, what you enjoyed about Martha's work, maybe what you didn't like, maybe something that you learned completely new. Just respond. I don't necessarily have any criteria. I just want to hear your thoughts. If you guys want to do that right now, that'd be great. So this is the last time I'll see you guys this week and before Easter. So I just want to say happy Easter to everyone. Enjoy the holiday and rest up and stay healthy. Okay. So take care, guys. Again, thank you for being so attentive and asking great questions. I was really impressed.
I have a question.
Yes.
I need to let this get leather hard, but like